First up, on the Factor Uncensored, former U.S. Attorney Eric Holder was in Houston today. His goal was to have a roundtable discussion with young people about the approaching election in Texas and the 2020 presidential bid. The brainstorming session was organized by the political action group Jolt Texas. I also had a chance to chat one-on-one with the chairman of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. The goal of the group is to end gerrymandering when it comes to congressional districts. Mr. Holder, having the opportunity to talk to so many young people, what are you hoping to do with that information once you go back to D.C. and plan out the next election process or cycle?
Well, I got to tell you, it was a very good thing to be able to listen to them today. The ideas that they had as to how you could organize people, the issues that they identified as having great meaning to the people in the communities that they come from. Those are the kinds of things that we take back with us to Washington, D.C. as we try to come up with our strategy, try to figure out what issues we're going to be focused on. You know, it's not like a Washington down strategy. It's really kind of a local-based strategy and bring it back to Washington so that we can be most effective.
One of the things that you tweeted about most recently was prison reform, Florida. You're saying that Republicans are trying to roll that back. How do you maintain control of the will of the people and what they voted for in allowing people to get a second chance?
And that's a great question, and that's a huge problem. You know, that amendment in Florida was voted on positively by 64% of the people. Now, Republicans in the state legislature are trying to, in essence, in some ways, undo it. So I think meetings like this, we have to have people who are aware of issues like that, organize, and then confront their public officials in public meetings, you know, in demonstrations, doing all the kinds of things that people have the power to do. I think people underestimate the power that they have as regular citizens.
Any plans to turn Texas blue? Is that possible?
Oh, I think, yeah, change is possible. I think I saw that in these young people here today. I think we saw it in the midterm elections in 2018, where you saw substantial gains by Democrats. There is a desire for positive change. There is a desire for government that represents the will of the people, and I think that will ultimately turn Texas blue.
And of course, one of your main issues is redistricting, gerrymandering around the country in various congressional districts. How do you get the people to make a difference in that issue or on that issue?
I think you have to make people understand that gerrymandering, unfair redistricting, has a direct impact on issues that people care about. They're directly connected, whether it is expansion of Medicaid, whether it is reproductive choice, whether it is sane gun safety measures, whether it's criminal justice reform. People care about those issues, but they need to understand those issues are directly connected to gerrymandering.
And do you leave this meeting with young people here in Texas, with a positive outlook for Democrats around the country?
Yeah, I leave here with a real positive outlook for progressives, for Democrats. But more important than that, I leave here with a real positive outlook for the nation. Because I think that these young people who are the future are committed, they're idealistic, and they're trying to do things in the right way. This nation is going to be better because of involved young people like this.
Now, while we had a chance to meet with Holder, we also asked him about the Electoral College process. Should there be a change, an issue he addressed on Twitter just earlier today? He's talking about abolishing it. When we talk about the Electoral College, you have an issue with that.
Yep.
What kind of changes do you want to see when it comes to Electoral College here in this country, or just totally do away with it and go by popular vote when it comes to presidency?
Well, I think that, you know, the best solution would be to simply do away with the Electoral College and have the people have a direct voice in who the President of the United States is. That's the one office in this country that is national in scope. Not senators who represent a state or a congressman who represents a district. The President represents the entirety of the United States. I think there ought to be direct election. But if you can't get a constitutional amendment to do away with the Electoral College, there's this thing called the Interstate Compact, so that each state would cast its electoral votes for the national vote, the national popular vote winner. And I think in that way you undo the power of the Electoral College. But in any case, somehow, some way, we have to do away with the Electoral College.
Joining us here on The Factor Uncensored to discuss the whole Electoral College process is former Republican candidate Justin Lurie, I'll just have to look at you, and Dr. David Branham, UHD. We want to thank you guys for coming on The Factor Uncensored. When you see Eric Holder say that we should get rid of the Electoral College, Dr. Branham, your thoughts on that?
I understand that there's a weakness in the Electoral College. I mean, we've had people elected that we've thought should not be elected. The problem is getting a better system instead of the Electoral College. I haven't heard.
Why can't we just trust the popular vote? Well, everyone votes across the country, and we tally those numbers, and whoever wins, wins. So what's wrong with that?
Well, what's wrong with it is, by the Constitution, if you don't get a majority of the vote, it goes to Congress. It goes to the House of Representatives. We didn't get a majority of the vote. And like Justin was telling me before the show, I mean, Hillary Clinton didn't get a majority of the vote. By the Constitution, we would have to go to the House of Representatives to elect a president. No one wants that. So, and then if you had a popular vote, then there'd be a whole lot more candidates get in the election. You wouldn't wait for a party nomination to get in. You would get in as an independent. And so things would change dramatically in that situation. So we have to make sure that we have a system that's better before we throw out the system we have.
Justin, looking at the current system that we have, are you satisfied with it? Does it need some tweaking? Do we need to make changes?
I'd rather stick with the system we have now than to open, let's call it maybe a Pandora's box of having a constitutional convention to change it. What Eric Holder said, if I heard him correctly, was really pretty interesting. He said, well, it's the only nationally elected office and the people should have that direct vote. And he has a good point. It is the only nationally elected office. But what's interesting is that you would essentially disenfranchise so many of the smaller states, the Alaska, the Wisconsins, which is actually really a pretty large state in itself, but all those Midwestern states and all the, like the Wyomings and the like, who currently have a little bit more power because of the way the system works out. And so if you take away the Electoral College, you're essentially doing away with federalism. And so should the whole country just bow down to Washington, or should we stick to those original principles from the Constitution of having more local control in your communities, in your states? I mean, it's the old question. Do you want your schools run by your local community or by Washington? And so those two things really do start to tie in together. It's just ironic that you had so many of the Democratic presidential candidates in some of the smaller states this past weekend. You had Wisconsin, you had, what's the other ones? Pennsylvania, and you had, oh, there's another good one, I forgot. It'll come up. And as soon as they say, hey, we're here, we want your vote, by the way, we want to take away the Electoral College, it's putting all that power into California and New York, and certainly not Texas.
And is this mainly I guess, a plan by the Democrats? Since Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump when she had actually more votes than he did, but he won the Electoral College. Is this mainly being pushed by the Democrats for that specific reason? Right
now they are, but I would warn the Democrats that it can happen the other way around also. All you have to do is go back to 2004. If 1% of the Bush voters in Ohio would have voted for John Kerry instead, the same exact thing would have happened in the opposite direction, where John Kerry would have won the election, even though he'd lost the popular vote by 3 million votes. So this can go either way. The other thing that you have to think about is, think about Washington, D.C. here. Think if Kamala Harris gets 90% of the vote in Washington, D.C., and Donald Trump wins the popular vote, those Washington, D.C. votes are going to go to Donald Trump. They're not going to go to her. And I think there's a lot of voting rights problems with this. So this national popular vote, I think, is going to have to go through the courts. They cite the original Constitution on this in Article 2, but since that time we've had the 14th and 15th Amendment that protects voters and who they vote for. So I think there's going to be a lot of test cases if enough states get to the point where the national popular vote is something that's being considered.
So be careful what you wish for.
Absolutely.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming here on The Factor.